welcome everyone to our third and final panel that we're hosting today as part of the worldwide teach-in on climate and justice. I am Claire Jantz. I'm a professor in the Geography Earth Science Department and also the director of the Center for Land Use and Sustainability. These issues that we're talking about are really at the core of some of our values at the CLUS, and so we're really excited to be convening these panels today. And I'll also just point out here that we are one of many events happening today related to the worldwide teach-in on climate and justice. The whole point of this teach-in is to try to focus attention on some of the issues with equity and social and environmental justice that already exist and that are kind of deepened with climate change. So a growing body, let me manage my tech, apologies for the camera angles. So we know, or we have been, a growing body of evidence is now suggesting that existing social and economic inequalities contribute to a greater risk of climate-related hazards and impacts, especially for disadvantaged communities. Climate change disproportionately impacts women. Climate change impacts, including heat waves and other extreme weather events, negatively affects many aspects of human health, including nutrition, mental health, and our ability to work in or enjoy the outdoors. And the most vulnerable among us feel the brunt of these impacts the most. These findings emphasize the need to really place social justice at the center of climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies. And as one of the leads on Shippensburg's climate action plan, I have certainly learned a lot, and it has made me rethink our approaches to mitigation and adaptation. Just listening to the program so far, and so we have really been focused on our panels today on sort of highlighting and learning more about some of the underlying social justice issues that we see in our society, and also learning about how to address some of those inequalities, because working towards a more just society will kind of automatically result in communities that are more resilient to climate change. So before I introduce our panelists, I also want to mention that we have representatives here tonight from Climate Solutions. Climate Solutions is a collaboration focused on community engagement and solutions-based reporting to help Central Pennsylvania move towards climate literacy, resilience, and adaptation. Some of us are familiar already with Scott Blanchard from WITF. He is joining us here tonight. He's one of Climate Solutions partners. He's mingling here in the crowd. And for those of you on Zoom, I will be sharing a couple of links with you. State Impact Pennsylvania and Climate Solutions is really interested in hearing from all of us in terms of what we want to hear and learn about from media sources related to climate change and adaptation. So if you're here in the room, Scott is especially interested in talking to you if you're a student. And for those of you on Zoom, like I said, I'll be sharing some information with you all shortly. So one more note for you all on Zoom. You can submit questions and comments through the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that. Once the panelists have a chance to talk, we'll have time for Q&A, and we'll be incorporating questions from the audience and from our Zoom audience. So without further jib-jab from me, let me introduce our panelists. We have three great panelists coming to join us this evening. I'll start at the far end. Nathan Riegner is Pennsylvania's Director of Outdoor Recreation. He holds a PhD, and I'll say he's the first Director of Outdoor Recreation that we have had in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He holds a PhD in social science, with extensive experience analyzing, planning for, managing, and building collaboration to support outdoor recreation at every level, from the local to the international. Throughout his career, he served as a policy analyst, consultant, business owner, university professor, conservation commissioner, and trail club leader, all with a focus on helping communities, parks, trails, and tourism destinations deliver outstanding experiences while protecting their essential character. Nathan has worked in and with more than 100 parks, forests, trails, historic sites, and heritage areas in more than half the states and territories in the Union and overseas in Europe, Asia, and Middle East. So we got a ringer for our first director. But he's actually a native of Pennsylvania. He holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology and sociology from Gettysburg College, a Master of Science in Forestry from Virginia Tech, and a doctorate in natural resource management from the University of Vermont. So welcome, Nathan.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
We also have Amy Diehl, Dr. Amy Diehl. She is an information technology leader, but also a gender bias expert who has served in many roles during her career. She currently is the Chief Information Officer at Wilson College. But before that, she was the Associate Vice President and Chief Information Technology Officer here at Shippensburg University. So Wilson College gained a great leader. She retired from that position in 2021. Dr. Diehl consults on workplace gender bias, has served as a gender discrimination and retaliation lawsuit expert witness, and is a sought-after speaker. So we appreciate that she made the time to join us this evening. She's published numerous journal articles, and her writing has been featured in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Ms. Magazine. She's also the co-author of the forthcoming book on workplace and gender bias.
So glad to be here.
Thank you, Amy. Last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Marcellus Taylor, who serves as the Director of Health Equity at the Partnership for Better Health. He joined the foundation in 2021 and leads a portfolio of grants and initiatives focused on advancing health equity. He mobilizes strategies to engage historically marginalized communities and people with lived experiences throughout the sharing of power and decision-making towards addressing health disparities and shaping a more equitable future. He's currently a fellow with the Community Health Leadership Program with the Satcher Health Leadership Institute at the Morehouse College of Medicine. Dr. Taylor was recently elected to serve as a board member for the Beacon Clinic for Health and Hope in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is a free faith-based primary health care. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. So can I ask for a round of applause for our panelists? And I don't know if you all have agreed on an order where you want to start.
You want me
We'll
to
start with
Go for
Dr.
it.
Diehl.
Okay.
All
All right. Well, I'm so glad to be here tonight. Thank you, Claire, Dr. Jantz, for inviting me. So my expertise is gender bias in the workplace, as Claire mentioned. I have spent the last 13 years studying this phenomenon. I actually began study of gender bias when I began my PhD studies at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I was very curious about unconscious gender bias in particular and the ways it was holding women back at work. I've had my career in information technology, which you may know is male dominated. Throughout my career, I would watch the male leaders around me, and the thing that I noticed after a period of time is I noticed that they were being treated differently and better than the women. And so when I started my PhD, I started looking into barriers that were affecting women. So the past 13 years have been a journey. Through my dissertation research, I worked with 3 co-authors to develop a scale to measure gender bias. I published numerous journal articles, and as Claire mentioned, I'm now working on a book, which will describe the 6 primary factors of gender bias in the workplace. Gender bias may seem like this big, nebulous thing, but it's actually not. My co-researchers and I have broken it down into its various components, which consist of behaviors, structures, and processes. Once you can see and identify these behaviors and these processes, then you can start to root them out. So I'm going to give you a preview of the 6 factors that are 6 primary factors that are holding women back. So they are, number one, male privilege, which dominates societies and workplaces. Disproportionate constraints are placed on women, such as how and when they can communicate and what jobs they are steered toward. Women are given insufficient support, they lack mentoring and sponsorship, and are excluded from spaces where decisions are made. Women's work and their contributions are often devalued, the fourth factor, both monetarily and also through lack of not being given proper credit. Fifth factor is hostility, such as harassment, which is used to keep women in line and fearful of speaking up. And then the final factor is gender-biased acquiescence. As a result of dealing with all the other barriers, women may limit their aspirations and remain silent about sexism in the workplace. All these have the goal of maintaining men's privileged place in society and in our workplaces, with the result being that men are overrepresented in leadership positions across society, in our governments, businesses, religious organizations, and our school systems. I'll give you an example. In the United States, the people in charge of our federal government and who are making decisions for all Americans are still mostly men, mostly white men, and mostly wealthy white men. Recently, President Biden put forward an infrastructure plan that included social infrastructure. So while the traditional infrastructure plan that included things like roads and bridges was passed through the Congress, the social plan called Build Back Better did not. One of the proposed versions of the Build Back Better plan cost $350 billion per year, and it would have funded things like universal pre-K, subsidized childcare, child tax credit, K family leave, and it also had $500 billion, by the way, for climate and clean energy. So the universal pre-K childcare, these are all things that are important for keeping for women accessing the workplace and remaining in the workplace. But the main objection of Republicans and moderate Democrats was the cost. To put it in perspective, the defense budget is approximately $778 billion per year, and it's increased $100 billion per year since 2015. Yet, you almost never hear people stopping defense funding because of cost. So, if you think about it, who does the Build Back Better plan help? It's women in the workforce, families, children, and the planet that we all share. So this bill was held up by the U.S. Senate, where just 24 of 100 senators are women. And so again, we've got majority men deciding what's best for this country, with the result that women's needs and also climate needs are not prioritized. But I want to switch to how this relates, talk a little bit about how this relates to climate justice. There's a recent study of the world's 1,000 largest companies. It found that those that had more women on boards were also more likely to be on track to meet climate targets. Those with the least diverse boards were either not on track to meet targets, or they did not disclose meaningful climate change data. And we know that climate change disproportionately impacts women. Women are 70% of the world's poor, and they're more likely to be more immediately impacted by climate change. An analysis of 130 studies found that 68% of the studies determined women were more affected by health impacts due to climate change than men. I'll give you a few examples of some of these studies. Studies have found that they are more likely to die in heat waves in France. The studies were conducted in France, China, and India, and tropical cyclones, as was studied in Bangladesh and the Philippines. In many world regions, women are more likely than men to suffer poor mental health, partner violence, food insecurity, following extreme weather events. And then there was a few U.S. studies. One in which pregnant women in Florida exposed to Hurricane Andrew in 1992 faced increased risk of fetal stress. Another one looked at pregnant women who experienced Hurricane Katrina. They had lower birth weight babies compared to those who were not exposed. And finally, women were more likely than men to be admitted to the hospital for respiratory issues due to wildfires in the West. So when women have little power as decision makers in government, their needs and their health issues are not sufficiently funded. When they have little decision-making power in businesses, it leads to a lack of innovation to solve issues that are unique to them. So hence, we must create gender equitable structures across society to ensure that everyone is included, supported, and that they can grow into their full potential.
Thank you, Amy. Marcellus.
All right. Can y'all hear me?
You want my
Sure. Thank you.
mute button? Yeah.
Thank you. It is good to be here, especially on the panel with these amazing folks. Again, I'm Dr. Marcellus Taylor. I'm excited to be here at SHIP, and Dr. Amy and I share something in common. We both received our doctorate from IUP. And I know that that's deadly language because I'm at where SHIP happens, they tell me. So I got to be careful talking about another PASHE school. So I'm going to try. I see some students looking at me like, okay, I got your point. But because it's still Women's History Month, and because I was raised by these majestic chaplet sisters, I could not come up here without acknowledging that. And I think Dr. Amy helps me. I'm from Philly. Anybody from Philly here? All right. So I need to say, before I talk, I am trilingual. On most days, I speak good English. My second language is something, it's a small dialect called Philadelphianese. So I say John, young boy, old head, and stuff like that. And then third, I am fluent, as my wife tells me, in sarcasm. And so at any given time, I could kind of flow in between these particular languages. And I'm sure I have some other people who speak sarcasmese, and so you can help me translate. But I want to start with a poem from a woman from 1920. Her name is Georgia Douglas Johnson. And she said, "Your world is as big as you make it. I know, for I used to abide. In the narrowest nest in the corner, my wings pressing close to my side, but I sighted the distant horizon, where the skyline encircled the sea, and I thrive with a burning desire to travel this immensity. I battered the cordons around me. I cradled my wings on the breeze. I soared to the othermost reaches with rapture, with power, with ease. Your world is as big as you make it." We're in this panel discussion. We're having this teach-in because we're talking about the world. And I think it was amazing for her to give that lyrical genius in 1920 when we talk about women, and when we think of the Harlem Renaissance, we kind of go to the men, but she was kind of right there with them. And so the question that was presented to us as panelists is, what are the key issues, findings, experiences in your field of expertise that will lend to some type of solution? And I said the first answer to this question, we must define, for me, health equity. And I take this from, there's an organization called Helen, so Health Equity Leadership and Exchange Network. And they suggest that health equity exists when all people, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic status, geographic location, or other societal constructs, have fair and just access, opportunity, and resources to achieve, here's the part that sticks out for me, their highest potential of health. Because I like teaching, I then had to ask myself, well, how are folks' highest potential for health impacted by climate? And I think the health effects of these disruptions include increased respiratory and cardiovascular disease, injuries, and premature death related to extreme weather and events, changes in the prevalence and geographical distribution of food, water, waterborne illness, and other infectious disease. And the CDC, they kind of label 8 things, and I just kind of want to go over them fast. I'm not gonna go in depth, but severe weather, so injuries, fatalities, right? Lest we forget that it was only last year that Texas, one of the hottest states, was frozen, most of the state. Now, we can talk about the political implications, and that's fine, but this happened in Texas. The same Texas that 3 years before that had one of the worst hurricanes. This same Texas. And so severe weather, air pollution, which is directly related to asthma, changes in vector ecology. So we're talking about malaria and different fevers and Lyme disease. We're talking about another category is increased allergens. I don't know about you, but because in Pennsylvania, we've lost 12 days of winter. If you have allergies, you'll notice that way before spring got here, I'm talking about late February, you were feeling the impact of those allergies. And I have severe allergies. So I'm just like, oh, I'm taking Zyrtec, Claritin, I'm taking all 3 of them, right? Like, because we lost 12 days of winter. Think about that. And then, water qualities and impact. So we're talking about harmful alluvial blooms. We're talking about water and food supply impact. So malnutrition, diarrhea, disease, environmental degradation. So forced migration, civic conflict. And let's not, also talk about one of the things that Dr. Amy so eloquently put is the impact it has on mental health, right? Well, we don't tend to think that because we don't see it. But I will tell you this, going from these weather changes, and Pennsylvania has an interesting weather pattern. Tomorrow's going to be like 70 degrees. Yesterday when I got in my car, it was 23. It doesn't make me say, yay, let's go to work, right? It doesn't make me, yay, let's go to class. And so these things have an impact. And then finally, extreme, heat. And I want to stick with that extreme heat, analogy. So now that we have a better understanding of how climate impacts health, it is vital to look to see if the demographics mentioned and what I just talked about, in terms of race, gender, sexual orientation, are they impacted by these 8 areas? And I would argue that they are, right? And so, example, I know that, we know that climate triggers rising temperatures, which can cause health and heart-related death, or heat and heart-related death. And it leads me to ask the question, are there particular demographics that are impacted by that? Dr. Amy talked about women, but if we just go based on ethnicity and race, we see that Black folks are disproportionately impacted by rising heat. Then after that, someone can guess, Latinx, Hispanic, after that, Asian, after that, then there's the average of everyone, and then below that, there's white folks, right? And that's not to say, hear me, I want people to hear me correctly, because I know sometimes we get in this thing where it's like, wait, I'm white, what does it mean? What I'm suggesting is that while the onus is not on you, these are critical, points to consider. So when Dr. Amy's talking about how the role men play, I have to take onus of that and say, whoa, Marcellus, how do you show up in the space? Is she talking about me in particular? I don't believe so, but I have to be mindful about how I show up in the space. And so when I look at this chart, and this was based on, where we are, this is 2019, right? And so we can't help but to say, well, that's just the impact of heat. What about the impact of severe weather? There's a famous image, I challenge you to Google, type in Whole Food Hurricane Katrina. In every area where there's a Whole Food, that Whole Food was up in 2.5 weeks. There's still residents in the lower 9th ward who don't have their homes now. And we're talking about 2005, right? 2005. I was still salty about the Eagles losing to the Patriots in 2005. But Whole Food was back in 2.5 weeks. At least we forget who at that time typically shops at Whole Food. Come on, we can do the work, right? I say that to say before my good brother takes the mic, is that if we're going to be serious about the work that health equity requires, it's going to require us to get out our comfort zone and directly address those things we can control. And I want to argue tonight, when we get to another part of this panel, that there are things we can directly control and ways we can influence ourselves and the people around us. So thank you so very much. Thank you.
Outdoor recreation seems so trivial right now. But it's not, it's very important.
It is.
Okay, I'm Nathan Grigner, Director of Outdoor Recreation for DCNR. Thank you. And thank you most of all for being here. Okay. I want to talk about what is outdoor recreation. I want to share a story with you. And I'm going to try and link that story to climate change. And I've never tried to make that link before. So this is a bit of an experiment. And I'm going to ask for your help with that, particularly when we get to the question and answer discussion part of this. And then I'm going to share with you 3 ways that I talk about, or three theories that I think are ways to think about equity and inclusion issues around outdoor recreation. And hopefully we can weave those together into some big picture approaches for the future and some more immediate, more operational approaches. So what is outdoor recreation, right? I sometimes like to play the game of is it in or is it out? Like hiking, outdoor recreation. How about scenic driving or golf? Is that outdoor recreation? But I don't think that's a very useful game to play. It's a fun game, but not a useful game. So there is a story, since we're at an academic institution, we need to cite the literature. Voltaire and Taves, 1961, I think it's the Journal of Forestry, I'm not sure. Anyway, these two social scientists were up at Quetico Superior talking to anglers about their fishing experiences. And the anglers would come back to camp at night, they had no fish in the creel, and the social scientists would ask them, well, how was your fishing today? And the anglers would say, it was great. The social scientists would say, but you didn't catch any fish. And the anglers would say, yeah, but like, we saw the sunrise and we saw an eagle, and I had some heavy stuff on my heart, and I spent the day in the boat with my buddy, and we talked it over, and I feel better now. And so it was a great day. And so there's more, but the story here is that there's more to fishing than catching fish. There's more to outdoor recreation than just the activities or the places we do it. It's a motivational process. It's a process about benefits. It's up here. Outdoor recreation is a psychological process. Dr. Taylor talks about finding your highest potential for health. This is a place where I think outdoor recreation intersects with health. It's about self-actualization. It's about becoming our best person. That's what we spend our leisure time doing, right? Recreation is leisure as opposed to our obliged time, our both economically productive work and our domestic work. Stuff we gotta do versus stuff we wanna do. And when we're doing stuff we wanna do, I think that we get to my mission statement. This is my mission statement. Now I'm going Professor Rigner on you. I years ago came up with a personal mission statement, and it is so handy whenever I am asked a question and I'm not sure what to do, like you're interviewing for a job or whatever. If you have a mission statement you can fall back on, it's ace. Okay, so I believe that recreation experiences are powerful and meaningful for us. I believe that when we engage with nature or the environment to have those experiences, we're specifically trying to shape our relationship with the environment. We're trying to figure out our place in the world. I think the more of us that have those experiences, the better we are as individuals and the better we are as a society. I also think that I know that there is often an unfortunate negative relationship between the numbers of people seeking those experiences, the pressures they place on the places they're going for them, and the ability of those places to deliver the goods, the health goods, the economic goods, the environmental goods, the experiential goods, et cetera. And so my mission is to work on this problem, this classic carrying capacity problem, to do what we can to flex the boundaries of this box to get as many of these goods for as many people as possible within the environmental, social, cultural, economic, administrative constraints of these places. Okay, so that's what outdoor recreation is. Outdoor recreation is a psychological process that delivers us benefits. It's not just a walk in the woods. Okay, so that's outdoor recreation. Now my story. My story is about our Western understanding, our Western relationship with nature. It began in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, right? They're in the Garden of Eden, it's paradise, everything's wonderful, something happens and they get thrown from the garden into the wilderness, into the place of nature. Wilderness, wilder, the place of the wild animals, the place where you get eaten. Okay, so from Adam and Eve, Jesus being tempted for 40 days by the devil in the wilderness, Moses crossing the wilderness on the way to the promised land, the pilgrims, right, the settlers landing here on the coast, needing to tame the wilderness so that they can be safe from the savages. This whole Western Christian framework sets up nature as a place that harms us. It is bad for us. We get to the romantics, the transcendentals, we're like 1820, 1860 now. And we start seeing that there's beauty in nature. We're working in factories, things are urbanized. We don't like that. We start to value the wildness, and we see that things are better if we can combine the two. It's a big sea change. It's thousands of years of like the story we've been telling ourselves changing. Now we get to the modern era, and I would posit to you that we flipped from nature as a place that is dangerous to us being dangerous to nature. This is the whole narrative of climate change, right? As if this ball is not going to be spinning 500,000 years from now, with or without us, and just as happy. We are a bad force for nature. We're changing the climate. The earth needs saving, right? We see this play out in leave no trace. When you are to go to the woods, you are to leave no trace. When you're gone, as if you were never there. And like, there's just some radical theories that I'm talking about. My secretary might not like to hear them. We're in an academic institution. I think they're points worth considering. But in this through line, what is clear to me is that people and the environment are two separate entities in each version of those stories. And I think that that is part of the root of our justice and equity issues when it comes to outdoor recreation and our experiences in nature and the environment. I think that it leads to us having an unjust relationship with this planet on which we're living. And until we find a way to be members of the community of life that exists on this planet and interact with just equity with all of our peers living and non on this planet, I don't think we have a way out of the climate situation we're in. So that's like this is the far out stuff that I need your help with when we're talking about it. Okay, now, we know outdoor recreation traditionally in the United States is the white male middle class pursuit. All of our institutions have been set up to serve those purposes, and that's where we see our participation. And that is not good. If my mission statement, if these are powerful and meaningful experiences and we're better as individuals in a society if we have them, then this participation pattern means that we're leaving points on the board. No, we're leaving points on the table that ought to be on the board. I don't know. So we need to address this. And when I think about addressing it, I think about three theories. One, marginality. One of the causes for this is marginality. It has to do with resources, time, money, information, right? If you're doing wage work and you don't find out what your work schedule is for next week until this week, how are you going to get a permit to go camping in a national park? You can't see 60 days ahead of time to get that. If you don't have the information, if nobody's taught you how to do these things, you don't know how to do it. Marginality, access to resources. Two, institutional discrimination or bias, whether it be overt or the other backgroundy kind. I mentioned earlier that all of our systems and institutions are set up to cater to specific interests that were in power 100 years ago, that remain in power today, and that ought not be the sole power moving forward. And this is reflected in our workforce. The outdoor recreation workforce is white and it's male. It's reflected, the trite example is families from certain types of communities like to recreate in large groups, while other communities, black and brown groups, while other groups, white groups, like to recreate in small nuclear family groups. And guess what our picnic grounds are set up for? 1 4 to 6 person picnic table and 1 grill. We have group size limits in our park that are like 12 to 15 usually. So institutional bias and discrimination, all the way up through the flags that you got to drive past to get to some of these places, and the very real cultural legacies of unsafety in wild and natural places. The third theory is about subcultural differences, and this has to do with this way that things were set up versus the interests of our society. And we got to know, planning for parks, managing lands is a 30-year, 50-year, 100-year proposition. So the decisions we make now need to reflect the interests of what our society will be 30 years from now. And that's tricky. How do we see the future? We know we're not on course to get there. So when we're in outdoor recreation, thinking about the kinds of policy or changes we need to make, I think we need to filter them through these three theories. Okay. Thank you.
I just want to, yeah. I am failing as a moderator because I think every time I'm supposed to like step in and do something, I'm just trying to like recover from my mind being blown from all of these ideas. So so I'm gonna continue. I know I gave you all some additional questions to think about, and we'll do that. But while we're sort of thinking through some of those questions, I want the audience to be thinking about questions, comments. If you're on Zoom, please shoot some comments and to the Q&A, and then we'll have more of an open discussion. But I had asked you three to also think about what policy, cultural, economic, or other changes are needed to address the unequal conditions that you describe or experience. And secondly, and this is a question we often get just from the audience, what actions can we as individuals take today to contribute to a more just society? So should we start with Dr. Diehl?
Okay, I will start. Okay, so I'm going to address the first question. What policy, cultural, economic, or other changes are needed to address unequal conditions you described? And I'm going to start by telling you what doesn't work. My co-authors and I wrote a recent article for Harvard Business Review. And the article, I think the basic title was Why Gender Bias Persists in Female-Dominated Workplaces. And what we say in the article is that there's this theory that's called the add women and stir approach. And the theory is if you just add enough women into any kind of organization, that will contribute to and that will lead you to equity. And I want to tell you that based on my research and based on the research of others, that is false. So we had looked at, in our study, we had looked at women and women leaders in 4 industries, law, so women lawyers, healthcare, physicians, women in higher education, leadership, and women in faith-based nonprofits. And the thing about those industries is they are all either gender balanced as an industry or female-dominated. Healthcare is very female-dominated. Of course, the people, as you go up the hierarchy in the leadership chain, the numbers of women decrease, but the industries overall are female-dominated. And what we found, so we used the scale that we developed, the gender bias scale for women leaders. We surveyed a sample from each of women from each of these industries. And what we found was that gender bias was still prevalent in each of the industries. So we know that just adding women into a an organization, it does nothing to eliminate the processes and the standards and the structures that were created, the organizational structures that were created way back by men, for men, with men's interest in mind and not so much women's. So I want to switch to what does work, and I'm going to start with the policy aspect. I'm going to actually, most of my comments here relate to policy. Policy changes that are needed to support women in the workplace are similar to many of the items that I talked about earlier in President Biden's Build Back Better plan. And the goal, again, is to make sure that not only are we getting women into the industry, but when they're in there, that we are supporting them, that we are making sure that they are equally valued and are given equal opportunities. So again, some of these I've already mentioned, but paid family leave is huge. We're the only high-income industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have some kind of mandated paid family leave. So we need paid family leave that is gender neutral. And we also need to make sure that we're encouraging and incentivizing men to take paternity leave. Too often men fear backlash if they take the leave. But if they don't, when they don't take it, what ends up happening is that caring for newborns or caring for sick family members continues to be seen as a women's issue. And so therefore women continue to be disadvantaged. So it's really important that the United States gets on board with every other country, almost every other country in the world, and mandates family leave. The next item is subsidized high-quality childcare and universal pre-K, which will help women to remain in the paid workforce. And then next, equal pay is really, really important. Policymakers must make it easier for women to report unequal pay and also to file lawsuits. The way that our current laws are set up, it's really unequal pay. It's really, really difficult to prove. One thing that helps with this is pay transparency laws. When your pay is out for public information, like for example, pay transparency exists in the public aspect of the state of Pennsylvania. It makes it really hard to hide to hide the inequities because the data's all out there. Anybody can go analyze it. So organizations must also take the step to make sure that they're paying women equally for equal work. And then the other thing that organizations themselves can do is they just have to improve diversity and inclusion. Again, it's not just enough to have women in the workforce; they have to feel supported and included. And one thing that organizations really need to do is they need to make sure that women are equally represented across all business units, not just those that are seen as women's careers. So like in a hospital, not just the nurses, for example, making sure that they are, and the administrative assistants, but making sure that they are equitably represented as in physician roles across all specialties, and in leadership roles. So yeah, that's just one example. So I think I'll move to the second question, which was, what actions can individuals take to contribute to a more just society? And I appreciate this question very much because sometimes we think, well, I'm not a lawmaker, I'm not a business owner, so what can I really do to affect change? And there's actually a lot of steps that we as individuals can take to help improve gender equity across society. And first, I'm going to start in the political realm. So this is pretty basic, but make sure that you're voting, make sure that you're registered to vote, and you're voting in all elections. Examine candidate issues on examine candidates' records on women's issues and social justice issues, and also, of course, climate issues. The next tip is, contact your representatives and ask for change and explain why the change is important to you and for others. And then third in this area is actually to consider running for political office yourself. And there are lots of groups out there, particularly if you're a woman, there are lots of groups out there that you can connect with that will support your journey as a candidate. In the everyday work realm, there's also lots we can do to support women. I'm going to list a few ideas. There are lots more than what I'm going to talk about. But the first one is just to become aware of gender bias, learn about it, learn how it operates, learn to recognize it, and to teach others about it. Secondly, it's learning to be and becoming a good workplace ally. Whether you're a man or a woman, become a good workplace ally. Use bystander intervention to call out diminishing treatment of women when you see it. I'll give you an example. If you see a woman being interrupted or her idea being repeated by someone else without acknowledgement, this is a common gender biased behavior. If you see that happening, for example, in a meeting, make sure you're calling that out. You just say something like, hey, Jane just mentioned that idea. Let's hear her thoughts. A third idea is if you do run meetings, establish a no interruption rule. Women are disproportionately affected by interruptions. So what you can do is set a rule that there's going to be no interruptions and the interruptions won't be tolerated. And then when they do happen, then you call them out and let the person who is speaking finish. Fourth on my list is to give women credit and celebrate their accomplishments. Be sure to name and call out women's accomplishments in meetings and other public forums. Often we as women, we feel like we're socialized to not self-promote, to not be like, hey, look at me, look what I did. I fully support self-promoting for women, but it can feel awkward. And so a way around that is to, instead of like waiting for someone else to call out your accomplishment, you can actually use a buddy system to help with this. Find other women colleagues or find other colleagues, other allies with whom you can share your work accomplishments, and then you can call them out for each other in a workplace setting. Mm-hmm. And then last on my list is sharing something called office housework. Office housework is things like taking notes at a meeting, organizing the office party, cleaning out the office refrigerator, cleaning out the office microwave, or even just helping a colleague to improve a presentation or a project. Women are disproportionately expected to take on office housework, and they often experience backlash if they refuse. So as a good ally, make sure you're sharing the office housework. And in the higher ed setting, it would also, something that's closely related to service work for faculty, right? Where women, I think, have a harder time saying no to service work than and maybe Claire can tell us about that.
Yeah, Amy and I are sharing all that right
Yeah. So make sure that it's equitably shared, because the thing with office housework is it's not like it's valuable work. It's work that needs done. It's work that supports the whole team or the whole department or the whole organization. You just have to make sure that like everybody takes their turn and is doing it. So those are just some examples. There are plenty more, but I want to kind of leave you with this. You may not feel like in your role, you may not feel like you've got the power or the capacity to make organizational change. But I just encourage you to not assume that change isn't possible. So I would say do what you can in your own role. Ask your bosses and organizational leaders for what you and other women need to establish an equitable workplace.
Awesome. Thank you. Wow, I got a follow behind that. But I think what I'm going to call her Sister Dr. Amy has alluded to is this power of collaboration. There's a good book by Heather McGee, and it's called, Zero Sum. And the idea is that in America, we tend to look at zero sum. And I'm not trying to get political, but let me get political. Zero sum was on full display last week. At the Supreme Court hearing. Hear me. It was, if we let this happen, then what about us? Well, we know zero sum doesn't work. I'll give you an example. In Detroit had a beautiful swimming pool system. Beautiful swimming pool system. But because folks had zero sum mindsets and they didn't want to integrate, they put cement over one of the biggest recreational pools, They put cement over it and said, we're going to turn this into a park. Because we would rather no one have a pool. Here we go. Then for Black and white folks to come together. Ooh, scary idea. What I'm suggesting is that we first must break the zero sum. That is to say that when Dr. Amy is speaking, it's not, oh, she's talking about women, so where's my role? It's no, we need to champion women, and we also need to champion Black folks, and we also need to, and I'm just gonna go on record, here we go. Equity, when the lives of women and folks of color are improved for any organization, any institution of higher education, everyone's life is improved. Here we go. Let me see if I can give a practical example. There's no way in the world that we create equitable policies for women and people of color, and it doesn't create a system of equity for everyone. It just never has happened in the United States. Never has happened, right? And in fact, I would argue that that's why we have the rise of other individuals feeling empowered to do so. So let me answer the question. I think I want to go to the second question first. So what can we do individually? There's what I call AIA. I don't know what it sounds like, but AIA. The first is awareness. And this is the idea that I got to know what's going on. I must come out of my bubble. I must come out of where I'm most comfortable at. And I got to discover what is going on. I gotta not be so, removed from the world that I don't realize that climate is happening. I can't be so removed from the world that I'm like, wait, I didn't notice that everyone was cutting the women off in the meetings. And it's like, there's a thing. And actually I tell my mentees all the time yourself in the meeting. And one did, and he was like, yo, I cut every woman off. And one of them was his supervisor, who's the vice president of the entire company. He said, I cut her off. And I was like, what did she say? She didn't say nothing, right? This is a high vice president, may or may not be at Madison Square Garden, hypothetically. So we gotta get our heads out of the clouds and we gotta ask ourselves what's going on. Martin Gaye asked the same question, a similar question in the 60s that I'm gonna ask today. What is going on? What's going on around you when it comes to climate? What's going on around you when it comes to health? What's going on around you? What I discovered, Dr. Amy, is that there's little research about health equity as it pertains to student health services. Like you might find 10 since 1987. And I'm like, wait, we have all these college students. Every college campus has some type of either a collaboration agreement or an actual student health services. We never ask about the equity practices there. We never ask why we give out certain tests, but we don't give out other tests. We don't ask those particular questions. And so I think that we must be aware, and then we must identify. I believe that we are called human beings for a reason. Oftentimes we invest on being human doing, meaning I am known for what I do. When you show up to somebody, this is my credential. But fundamentally before that, I actually believe that we are human beings. That means that we need to be about the business of being something. And most times that being is not about what you do, it's who you are. It's the line of demarcation to say, I am not going to settle for this particular type of discrimination, period. Here is the line in the sand, right? Literally, my wife owns 2 businesses of the same thing. And to this day, Black women, when inspectors walk in from the State Department, they always go to her director, and she's the owner. They say, well, this is a beautiful facility. And one person had the unmitigated gall to ask my wife to hold her coat. She was like, well, I'm looking for the owner. And my wife held her coat. That woman has never stepped foot in that place again. So, but again, these are the type of things, and it happens, not just women, that was one example, but men do it all the time. It's like, they'll come to me and say, hey, how do you feel about this? I'm like, my name is nowhere in this paperwork. You gotta go talk to Denise. Right? So I identify, and what does it mean to identify is who am I and what tools do I have to positively impact what's going on? Let me share this with you. And by the way, tools, I'm talking about, your students, your college, social media. And let me just say this. I always have to remind college students this. Half the civil rights history that we know was led by college students. So I take a vested interest in saying that if you're a college student, you are in the same lineage of those who sat at counters. You're in the same lineage of those who walked from Selma to Montgomery. And let me also say the March on Washington happened in 1968, I believe, and there were estimated 250,000 people there. That is 250,000. And someone tell me what social media app they use. None. So if they were able to get 250,000 people out, then what excuse do we have with TikTok? What excuse do we have with Twitter and Facebook? Because if we can use Twitter to almost burn down Walmart, we definitely can use, TikTok, we can definitely use TikTok for the greater good. And I'm pro technology. And then lastly, what actions? What will I do with the tools that I have that will measurably create positive change to what's going on? Helen Keller said the only thing worse than being blind is having no vision. Sit with that, right? Like we have to have a vision, and we have to, like the good doctor said, while we don't have a magical ball, we can dream, as Dr. Jeremy Williams says, we can dream better dreams, right? I have 3 sons, MLK. So part of the reason why I love these community panels, because I am biased. That means that if I invest in you, you're going to invest in the future. And so by the time my son, who, oh my goodness, in 10 years will be 18, by the time he's 18, I want him to look at me, Dad, they really discriminate against women? No. Like, wait, people, LGBTQA and plus people, they were really discriminating? There was a time where you couldn't get married to who you love. Like, I want him to look at me and be like, y'all were terrible. Right? I don't want him to look at me and say, Dad, we're still fighting the same fight. Yeah. And I think in order to do that, we have to dream, we have to measurably dream better dreams. I always ask students when I teach, I always ask them this question. If money wasn't an issue, if you had unlimited time, how would you change the world? And I ask you the same question. How can you invest your time, your talent, and your funds? I'll say it again, how can you invest your time, talents, and funds? Here's the thing, and I'll close with this part. I used to always make excuses about giving money to different causes. But then my financial advisor asked us to print out a spreadsheet of 60 days. Does anyone want to know how much, at the time it was only 2 children, I had 3, how much we spent on eating out in those 60 days? it was nearing 7,000.
Wow.
And I said, wait, my wife is a superior cook. I'm a superior sous chef.
Mhm.
We can change this. Right, so at this point, I can say this without any qualms of lying or nothing like that. We live on about 75% of what we make because we had to make an adjustment. 7,000 can do some good for a local nonprofit. And so you have to decide, are you going to get in the game? And if you are going to get in the game, you got to do it with dreaming better dreams. So, yeah. That's how I feel going after Dr. Amy. So
Sit with that for a minute. Your final call to us was to be a leader.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important part of like putting this into action. It involves fear. It's scary to put it's scary to take a leadership role, to tell somebody, I think you're doing wrong and you need to stop. It's scary to be an example when you know you might get judged or get blowback from that. And so I think being courageous and leaning in is absolutely necessary. And I think like those of us who have some a bit more experience than you, who have done a few things, like it gets easier with time and practice. Okay. Here's another question, right? Like I like asking smart people the questions that I can't figure out, because I need help. And if we're talking about equity and inclusion and access with respect to outdoor recreation, there's a conundrum that I'm stuck in that is, I feel like there's a choice that's got to be made to get to the, like, what do we do? How do we get ourselves out of this? And so we recognize, you know, if you still follow me on that mission statement that outdoor recreation experiences are good and meaningful and powerful, and that we are all better for them, and many people aren't having them, then it leads to, well, we just gotta get those people who aren't hiking out hiking. We need to like make them do it. We need to educate them, teach them how good it is, and get them out there, like lead them on programs, which essentially says we need to make those people more like us. And if we recognize that us is not representative and us is a slice of culture with privilege and power, then like, hey, we're going to direct our efforts to transforming you with us is not the solution. That's not the future. So the like recruitment campaigns, it seems like there's a mark missed there. The other end of the spectrum is, you know, and I'm talking now state and national parks, forests. The other is we need to change these places and their missions to be reflective of our society and what people want. These places have missions. They're set up with long-term visions. They deliver multiple benefits for us. You know, a forest is planted, a forest in which we have recreation that we're also getting timber from is planted with a 70, 100-year rotation. A national park is designated, a conservation easement is put on a piece of land for reasons that are good. And taking those long-term missions and setting them aside to make decisions and uses that are reflective of dynamic social forces also doesn't seem like the solution. Because we do get values from that target that vision that's way out there that we're trying to strive to. And so one thing we need to do at policy level is figure out the middle path, or figure out the balance between these two things. Figure out a way to make our outdoor recreation systems inclusive and representative, to understand and own their social functions at the same time as understanding and realizing the long-term benefits, and being true to mission. There's a leader in the department, John Norbeck, he's one of the deputy secretaries. He actually, something that he talks about a lot is preserve the core and stimulate progress. And I think that there might be something that we can work on. So that's like, at the policy level, cracking that nut, figuring out the third way is something we gotta do. And when we do it, we gotta make sure, I go back to those three theories, right? Like, well, if people could just get to parks, if inner city residents could just get to parks, then that's transportation as a barrier, get a bus, done. But I get to the park and I feel unwelcome and there's nothing there I wanna do. In other words, my quip there is about remembering that there is no single solution to all of this, but that solutions we put in place need to address the many different ways that people interact with these spaces and take into account the complexity from multiple different angles, not and or, but and all three.
Yep. Sure.
Great. All right. One more round of applause for these guys, and then we have time for questions. So we have about 10 or 15 minutes for group discussion, questions. What do we have out there? Dr. Cornell.
I was just gonna say, there's one in the Q&A, I don't know if that's.
There is one. So we have one from a Zoom attendee, and I believe this is probably for Dr. Diehl. How can I best support someone who expresses bias or marginalization to me in confidence?
Oh, okay, this is a good one. So first of all, if somebody is expressing that to you in confidence, that's actually a good thing, because that means that they probably have built enough of a trusting relationship, like they trust you enough with that information to share that with you. And so, the thing I would say is, first of all, you want to listen, right? Make sure that you're, asking good questions, to elicit, their full story, their full experience. You want to make sure that you are communicating to them that, in terms of steps forward, that, first of all, that you're not going to, go ahead of them or share that information, that, the reason they're coming to you is because that, like I said, they perceive you as someone safe, and it's likely that there's other people in the organization that are not safe. Obviously they've been, they've experienced bias or discrimination. It's, usually a person that is, or people that are exhibiting those behaviors. So you just want to express that, you want to encourage them to, stay in communication with you, but also you want to help them think through the situation. And also, one of the things I always say about bias and discrimination, if you are the person experiencing it, do not take it personally. When I was a young IT staffer and I was starting to experience some things, some bias, I thought I was at fault. I thought, this isn't happening to all my coworkers who all happen to be male or mostly male, right? I must be doing something wrong. When I started studying it, I realized it's not just me. This is a phenomenon that happens to women almost, ubiquitously, unfortunately. And so that helped me depersonalize it. So it didn't make my experience, it didn't mean that I had an instant solution or whatever, but it made me feel better, you know. It made me be able to externalize, right? And to think about solutions and options for you know, confronting it without taking it personally. So to answer that question, or to finish my answer to that question, if you're the person, you're the ally, make sure that you express to the person coming to you just that exact sentiment. Do not take it personally. You know, do what you can to encourage them to stay in communication with you, to come, you know, where the two of you can think through and strategize, you know, how to overcome the situation. But if somebody's coming to you, that's a really good thing.
Dr. Sykes.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to hear you all speak. So maybe for Dr. Taylor,
Hello.
can you speak to any of the maybe projects that Partnership for Better Health has worked with community partners that are working on these health equity issues, and how, especially maybe one that's climate related, and like what the project is that they're working on that would be a solution. And for the Director of Outdoor Recreation, what's your last name? I can't remember.
Rigner.
Dr. Rigner. Maybe if there are states that have really embraced this issue of finding solutions for increasing equity and access to their parks, can you speak maybe to an example of that? I'm just really curious to see what's worked in other communities.
So that's a great question.
Dr. Taylor, can you just repeat the question real quick? Because
Yeah.
everybody else.
Sure. So the question is, for instance, what is, you know, a project that, you know, either, you know, the Partnership for Better Health has funded, or actually is an initiative in terms of, you know, climate. And so I think that there are some climate adjacent projects, right? And that's part of, you know, my goal. And then starting, you know, pretty much October 1, I start September 30th, but October 1, you know, I can tell you that our next project, I'm doing an initiative right now that we're wrapping up, and it's about Black women in maternal health, which is Black women are dying at a terrible rate compared to all other women when it comes to childbirth, and which is just sad for so many reasons. And so we're working on that, but I can say that summer fall project is directly going to relate to that. I am, because I'm a fellow with Morehouse School of Medicine, in my we have to do this capstone project. We are kind of re-envisioning a school-based gardening program, because in the Macon, Georgia, just like Atlanta, Georgia, there's like these heat islands, meaning that heat disproportionately impacts. You can go by zip code. It's really, and by the way, one tool that you can use is called the EJ screen, the environmental justice screen, and you can plug up any demographics, and it is like, whoa, what's going on? But I will say, and this, what you didn't directly ask this, but I will say, is I think that it takes that type of imagination to, you know, envision a world. And Dr. Nathan was talking, and I couldn't help but to realize that when we think of like outdoor recreation, traditionally we have our thoughts. But I would say, I'm from West Philly, and I was just listening to some of the things. We played football outside in the street, right? My sister had like 1 million double dutch competitions, right? We played a thing called curveball, literally, because it's townhomes. Across you threw like a basketball, something that bounced, and if it hit the curb and came back, you got a point. It was really like, we could do this for hours. And so we had kickball, and so this was happening in the hood, right? But it was still outdoor recreation. And I think that, you know, finding a way to already see what's happening, because I believe in like that community voice framework, that the community already has a voice, right? There are pockets of the community that can kind of tell you what's best for that particular community. So to answer your question, but I want to say that to answer your question directly, that there are some, you know, some trailways that we funded and some other, you know, cooling projects that we funded, but I'm looking at a more integrated approach that we're going to, you know, release soon. So if you have any ideas, please let me know. I literally tell people in one email away, and Mary Ann can vouch for me. You send me an email in about maybe under an hour, you'll get an email from me. It's on my phone. My wife hates it, but I respond to a lot of emails. Dr. Nathan.
Yeah, thank you. That is absolutely, if you're getting quality time with friends and family, if you're getting physical and mental health benefits out of it, if you're connecting with the world around you, it's absolutely outdoor recreation. Okay, here's some things that it's like some things that come to mind at different levels, different scales. And from my department, something that we're doing in DCNR, at all of our state park and state forest trailheads, we've installed signs that says nature for all are welcome. And it's a little thing, but it makes clear that all are welcome. And it's not gonna solve the world's problems. But it was an act that was within our power, that we could execute immediately with the resources we had, and put a welcome mat out on every single trail. So there's actions like that occurring. There's actions like Venture Outdoors is an outdoor programming organization based in Pittsburgh. They, in collaboration with an outdoor recreation inclusion alliance in the state, have developed a racism prevalence reporting tool. It's a tool for the Pittsburgh area, a website you can go on to, and if you see racist graffiti, or if you have suffered incidents of racism or hate, violence, or speech in a park or on a trail in the Pittsburgh area, you can log that on their website. And then trip planners can look for places where the prevalence of these kinds of incidents are low, and can know that they can feel safer when they're going to a place. So that's something that's happening in Pittsburgh that I think is a very action-oriented approach. Outdoor clothing manufacturers and gear makers are making clothing and gear in sizes and shapes that they did not before, in sizes for bodies that are not conventionally athletic. And that's I think a very real change in that market forces. It's in some ways it's leveraging market forces because the demand is out there. In other ways, it is also companies, businesses saying, we know that making this piece of clothing is going to be marginally less profitable for us, but we know that these people ought to be served and deserve the same kind of experience as others. And so that's something that businesses are doing. My colleagues in New Mexico and Colorado, in their offices of outdoor recreation, we do not yet have an office of outdoor recreation here in Pennsylvania. We have aspirations, but we don't yet have one. The offices in New Mexico and Colorado have stood up outdoor equity funds, which are grant-making funds to help incubate businesses either owned by underrepresented groups, women, racial and ethnic minorities, or who serve those communities, making grants to help make their programs happen. So that's sort of a range of ways that different groups and individuals are trying to tackle this problem.
So I just have a little bit of a fast fact. You're here on the campus, the two-time Mid-Atlantic champion Outdoor Nation, campus winners. And so over 450 faculty, staff, and students over a number of years before COVID, I think Dr. Diehl got to participate in our campus challenge. And it's something that was it's a nationwide program, and it sort of pitted campus against campus to get outside. It's all social media hosted. People got to go out and do activities and log points for a period of time. But that program, fizzled in a sense at a national level. But I'm sort of seeing in my head like this really cool opportunity right, for DCNR and Partnership for Better Health and IT to do a Pennsylvania specific version of this, where again we take action. And not only think about it as being my time outdoors, but our time outdoors to heal, to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what do you guys say? Why don't we do something like that.
Listen, Shippensburg is in our service area, so I'm in. I always like that type of innovation. So you let me know, I'll come back to Ship and we can sit down. And him and I are at a conference next week. So if you email both of us, we can talk about it over breakfast or something like that. So, yeah.
I love your point about the IT or even like the social media aspect of it. I can remember participating and, part of that was like posting photos, on Facebook or Instagram or wherever. And I think like thinking about, DCNR and, Partnership for Better Health and like programs, like one of the things that is really important is that when you're putting out images, right, on your website or on any kind of media, that your images are representative of all types of people, so that the people who are using your services don't just look like one type of person, one type of race, one type of able-bodiedness, one type of body, so I think that, to your point, Sean, I think that that's an excellent idea.
And I would just sort of offer back, because I asked students, why they participated, and, it was a sort of a 6-week kind of competition, so, but it was exactly that. It was once they saw, right, people who looked like them, doing something that was new or fun or interesting, and it was easy and accessible to test it, we saw more and more participation as the weeks went on. It was the first thing that I did in the morning, where it was to jump on and see what experiences people were having. And then it was the last thing I did at night was to check to see, oh, that person went on this trail, or that person, and it was great because it was an opportunity to really, in a positive, constructive way. And I was so disheartened when at the national level, the funding and the support for that went away. So yeah, I just think it was something that was so cool.
And you got bonus points for doing, for socializing, for doing things in
Together
group.
in group.
So, so yeah, that's a great idea. If we can launch a statewide app, we can pilot it here in South Central Pennsylvania, get K through 12 involved and higher ed. That would be amazing. So we're about out of time. And I know that it seems like we haven't been talking much about climate change for the past little bit, but I think one thing that I could just comment on to go back to the beginning is that and like you said, Dr. Taylor, if you make things better for Black women, you make things better for everybody, right? And so if we can, if you don't think you're doing anything about climate resilience, if you're doing things to make other people feel welcome, to make, to raise other people up, to help address some of these underlying issues, even, just through interpersonal interaction, then you're helping to create a more resilient community, which means that our communities will be more resilient and be more able to cope with climate challenges. So I'll just leave that thought with everybody. And thank you all again for your time. Thanks to everybody for coming. Thanks to our folks who have hung on through Zoom. And keep an eye out. We'll be posting, we've recorded this, so we'll be posting videos on our YouTube channel soon. And also, just to revisit Climate Solutions, we have those folks with us here and in the chat. For those of you on Zoom, there is a survey and a website for you to learn more about Climate Solutions. So thank you all very much.